Hi there, my name's Deague-Hall and I'm a People Insights Consultant and Provisional Psychologist with Testgrid. Today I wanted to talk to you about unconscious bias. So more specifically, we're going to first of all talk a bit about what unconscious bias is before unpacking social categorization. We'll then look at the impact of bias on recruitment and development and talk through some strategies for reducing bias in the workplace. So, to get us started off, let's talk a bit about what unconscious bias is. So, unconscious biases are learned assumptions, beliefs, or attitudes that happen without our conscious awareness. Unconscious bias thrives on our tendency to make rapid decisions and judgments, and it's also influenced by our tendency to categorize other people according to our own experiences, society, and culture. So how does unconscious bias work? Well, our unconscious mind can process approximately 11 million pieces of information per second. This is quite different from our conscious mind, which can only functionally deal with around 40 information pieces in that same second. This means that to make sense of the overwhelming information points we are inundated with, we tend to take shortcuts and categorize information into assumptions or biases. In other words, we use our perceptual lens to filter out the majority of the input that we receive and filter in other insights. And those are usually the ones that are going to be quite easy to digest or surface level. Core features of our decision making are also influenced by unconscious processes. For this example, I'll talk a little bit about what's called the Stroop effect. So have a go at reading aloud the colours, so not the words, displayed on the screen now. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, so for those of you who are trichromats, so able to see all of the colours, you should have said blue, green, brown, yellow, and red. Now, let's try that again. Again, remembering that the aim is to verbalize the colour and not the word displayed on the screen. So I'll give you a moment again. How did you go the second time around? Chances are it was harder to accurately name the colour the second time around because you couldn't rely on your automatic congruent processing. Or, explained another way, you were required to challenge your brain's desire to automatically categorize the information presented to you, which you know to be true or may believe to be true based on your previous experiences and associations with these words. Evidently, attempting to make unconscious processes conscious requires deliberate awareness, effort, and understanding. That's what we're going to get into today. So we know that we filter out most of the info that the world has to offer us, but what do we do with the specially selected information that makes it through to our conscious minds? Well, we tend to take mental shortcuts and categorize that information based on long-held assumptions. So again, this can usually come from things like personal experience. The next question is, well, what do we make the assumptions about? Assumptions typically occur in the form of stereotyping and overgeneralizing based on predominantly superficial or sort of readily accessible information that we can really easily glean. And we'll unpack that in a little bit more detail shortly. How quickly do we notice specific details? It takes approximately 150 milliseconds to attend to things like skin tone and 100 milliseconds to attend to gender expression. You might be wondering, well, do all of us make these assumptions? Yes. As human beings, our default processing systems make both positive and negative assumptions as a means of classifying and, again, sort of categorizing that information that we're presented with. The last thing you might be wondering is this all normal? Yes. So while the act of forming biases is automatic, recognizing our biases and acting according to more conscious or rational data points is where we should be focusing our attention. This brings us to the concept of social categorization. Stemming from unconscious bias, social Social categorization, pardon me, is one of the mental shortcuts we take when we stereotype others. This comes from our desire to sort of simplify the complex world that we live in. And because of this desire, stereotyping tends to occur when we don't have enough time or motivation to get to really know or understand someone else. So for example, if you spotted, I suppose someone who looked quite youthful in the elevator at work, you might catch yourself mentally categorizing them as a junior, instead of verbally inquiring about their previous work and education experiences to confirm or disprove this assumption. This initial junior tag then leads you to classify this person as belonging to the larger group of young people, which you might have positive or negative biases about depending on your own experiences, along with the group that you see yourself as part of. Imagine next in this scenario that the young person in the elevator closes the door before you can step in. Despite the fact that you don't know anything about this person, including their age, without seeking further information, you find yourself thinking, all young people are so entitled. Because so much of this is happening subconsciously, our social categorization beliefs can feel really accurate. And this is quite interesting because the reality is that they're mostly based on really sort of distorted overgeneralizations. Interestingly, we tend to perceive people in the same social group as more similar than they actually are. And for us, when we're thinking about ourselves, that's called the in-group. We also see people in different social groups as more different than they actually are. So that's kind of the out-group. This premise is called out-group homogeneity and is thought to occur partly because we don't engage with members of the out-group as frequently as we do people in the same in-group to us. The quality of interactions that we have with that out-group also tends to be more superficial. At a subconscious level, one explanation for this could be that we tend to be a bit more open and relaxed around the people we perceive to be like us, and this actually helps us to relate better to people in that group. So in that way, we're sort of reinforcing this premise. So we're making more of an effort with the people in our in-group, and that kind of furthers that notion of the out-group. If we think of how social categorization can play out at perhaps a networking event or maybe in a job interview, and the only piece of information we have is that the person that you're looking to engage with went to either a private or a public school, you might find yourself gravitating towards or away from that person based on whether it matches your own experience. So while attending one of these schools and not the other doesn't tell us anything about that person's capability, drive, or interests, without additional context, we'll tend to make a series of assumptions about them based on this sole piece of information. So we might assume that perhaps someone will be more smarter or more resilient or perhaps more conforming based on whether you both experience private or public schooling. Again, this is a time-saving method for our brains and outlines how social categorization shortcuts can influence our preferences for engaging with others. So what does this look like in terms of recruitment? Well, when recruitment processes are not based on objective methods, but left up to our unconscious biases, things like candidate discrimination can occur, and this has quite a significant impact on, of course, the candidate and your entire workforce as well. So, of course, unconscious bias can have a damaging flow-on effect in recruitment processes where those objective methods are left out. So a typical scenario where this might happen is that perhaps you're doing an interview and you've made an assumption based on perhaps a candidate's name, their gender, ethnicity, education, or workplace history. Following that, you decide not to probe further into the candidate's qualifications or working style during an interview based on this kind of subconscious assumption that they're not the right fit or they're not part of your in-group. The result of that means that you end up missing out on diversifying your workforce, resulting in a decrease in things like productivity, creativity, and organizational competitiveness when compared to workplaces that do hire for diversity. Bias can also have a pretty big impact on development. So when it comes to performance appraisals, Harvard Uni research shows that people who identify as women are systematically less likely to receive specific feedback tied to outcomes, while men are offered a clearer picture of what they're doing well and provided with more specific guidance around what they need to do to get to that next level. In other words, women tend to be assessed on their past performance, while men tend to be assessed on their future potential. This results in fewer legitimate sort of opportunities for female development compared with their male counterparts. So again, really a lose-lose situation for the organisation. So by this point, hopefully you're wondering, well, what can I do to reduce unconscious bias? The first thing is to enhance your awareness. So by becoming aware of your unconscious biases, that's really the first step to reducing them. So trying to shift that unconscious into the conscious. The next thing is to sort of check yourself or self-monitor and really tune into yourself. So analyze things like your thoughts and reactions, especially when you're engaging with new people. The next thing to do is to really slow down, so reduce that pace. We know that unconscious bias occurs in microseconds, so really try and actively challenge that default narrative by leaving yourself with enough time to reflect and make those conscious, data-driven decisions instead of just kind of reacting on those instincts and assumptions. The next step is to seek out objective methods. So especially in your recruitment process, ensure that you are using really objective, valid and reliable methods. So things like testing throughout that entire employee life cycle, and also that those decisions that are eventually made are data driven. You should also seek to really commit to diversifying your workforce, and again, using things like assessments is a great way to sort of hold yourself accountable for that. The next step is to speak out. So now that you know the signs, if you witness or experience unconscious bias at your workplace, really encourage you to kind of be the champion and call it out. The final thing is to be really accountable and be open to recognizing your own mistakes, especially at the start. Commit to apologizing and doing better next time as well. In terms of some practical tips as well, so we know from research that enhancing our awareness of unconscious bias together with taking some simple but really direct actions is a great way to significantly reduce our own unconscious bias. So some practical steps you could consider to mandate truly representative interview panels, introduce quotas to ensure that diversity is kind of really embraced throughout the workforce, and also to consider controlling the environment by incorporating something like video interviewing into your recruitment processes. Video interviews are a great way to reduce unconscious bias for three sort of core reasons. So starting with standardization and fairness. In a video interview space, everyone is asked the same question in the same format, and it's free from things like intonation changes or sort of sidetrack conversations about maybe shared in-group preferences. All applicants are also given the same time period to think and to respond to questions. The next thing is accountability. So in terms of accountability, the interviewee is of course recorded, but the interviewer panel is also recorded. So what this is going to do is enhance the likelihood of decisions being based on the hiring criteria as opposed to sort of matching the interview panels in the group preferences or going off that gut good feeling in the interview itself. The final thing to consider is that multiple input. So there's also the opportunity to invite other panelists to weigh in on a candidate's interview. And ideally this would look like getting the okay from a range of really diverse stakeholders in the business. That's all from me today. So thanks so much for listening in. If you would like further support or assistance in reducing unconscious bias in your workplace, don't hesitate to get in touch. Okay, that's all from me. Cheers. Bye.